The sun beat down on the vast expanse of the Colorado Desert, where the rugged terrain made it seem like nature was challenging anyone to tame it. A crew of 20 experienced construction workers arrived at the site where a massive bridge was to be built. The project was ambitious, a suspension bridge spanning a deep canyon, promising to connect two isolated towns and save countless hours of travel. For many on the crew, this project meant months of hard work but also a good paycheck. Ryan Miller, the project manager, was in his early 40s with years of bridge construction under his belt. He was proud of his crew and knew they were the best for a project like this. Among them was Jake, a grizzled veteran of the trade, Megan, a sharp young engineer eager to prove herself, and Cole, the newest addition to the team, a quiet man who seemed to carry an air of unease. By the third day, the team had already begun initial surveying and laying the groundwork for the massive supports. The landscape was harsh, sharp cliffs, unpredictable winds, and the constant threat of dehydration. Despite the challenges, spirits were high. One evening, as the crew gathered around the temporary campfire set up near their trailers, Jake decided to share a bit of local lore. "This canyon isn't just any canyon," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Back in the day, they tried to mine it. A whole bunch of folks came out here looking for silver or gold, but the mines always seemed to collapse. Some said it was bad engineering. Others," he trailed off, glancing around at his colleagues, "said it was sabotage. Men who didn't want anyone to take what they claimed as theirs." Ryan chuckled, trying to keep the atmosphere light. "Sabotage or bad luck, Jake? Sounds like a tall tale to me." "Maybe," Jake replied. "But there's something about this place. You'll feel it. The silence, it's unnatural." That night, as the camp settled into quiet, Ryan lay awake in his trailer. The wind howled outside, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard a distant metallic clang, as though a hammer struck a pipe deep in the canyon. Shaking it off as his imagination, he turned over and tried to sleep. Far below, near the abandoned mine shafts, a faint flicker of light glowed for a few seconds before disappearing into the dark. Morning came early as the crew prepared for another grueling day of work. Ryan stood with Megan near the edge of the canyon, reviewing the plans for drilling and reinforcement. The jagged cliffs stretched endlessly below them, the shadows deepening as the sun rose higher. The team was on schedule, and Ryan was determined to keep it that way. By mid-afternoon, one of the drilling teams stumbled upon something unexpected, a hollow sound beneath the rocky ground. Curious, Ryan instructed them to dig further. After several hours of work, they unearthed the entrance to an old, boarded-up mine shaft. "Must have been from those mining days Jake was talking about," Ryan mused, inspecting the weathered wood and rusted metal reinforcements around the tunnel. Megan frowned. "The maps didn't show anything about a mine here. Should we report it to the state?" Ryan considered her question. Reporting it could mean delays, inspections, and potential shutdowns. This project was already a logistical nightmare, and any holdups could cost millions. "No need," Ryan decided. "We'll block it off and keep moving. We're building a bridge, not exploring history." Despite his dismissal, curiosity got the better of Cole, the quiet newcomer. During the lunch break, he sneaked back to the mine with a flashlight in hand. Stepping cautiously into the dark shaft, he noted how intact the structure was, as if it had been abandoned only recently. The air was damp and carried an earthy metallic scent. Deeper inside, he noticed strange markings scratched into the walls, symbols he couldn't recognize. The ground beneath him felt uneven, and his boots occasionally scraped against what felt like metal pipes or tools buried in the dirt. A faint, rhythmic sound echoed from further in, like the distant tapping of a hammer. Cole froze. "Hello?" he called, his voice swallowed by the dark. The tapping stopped. A shiver ran down his spine as the silence became oppressive. Turning quickly, he hurried out of the tunnel and back to the worksite. By evening, Cole's strange behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. He avoided conversation, keeping his eyes low as the team gathered for dinner. Jake, ever the observer, nudged him. "You look like you've seen a ghost, kid. What's got you all spooked?" Cole hesitated, his hands shaking slightly. "There's something wrong about that mine," he muttered. "I heard something down there." Jake smirked. "Probably just your imagination. These places can play tricks on you." But Ryan wasn't amused. "I told everyone to stay clear of that shaft. If you can't follow orders, Cole, you're off the site." Cole nodded quickly, not wanting to lose the job. Yet his mind kept circling back to the sounds he heard, and the strange feeling that he hadn't been alone in that tunnel. As the crew settled in for the night, the wind howled across the canyon, carrying with it an almost imperceptible sound, like the faint, distant echo of a hammer striking stone. The next day began like any other. The crew resumed their tasks, drilling, reinforcing, and preparing the ground for the massive bridge pylons. Ryan kept a close eye on Cole, who worked quietly but seemed distracted, often glancing toward the direction of the mine shaft. By mid-morning, the drilling machine hit a hard surface, forcing the team to pause. Megan, ever the meticulous engineer, climbed down to inspect the issue. What she found puzzled her. Beneath the rock lay what appeared to be an old pipe, its surface corroded but intact. "This doesn't make sense," she said, running her hand over the rusted metal. "There shouldn't be any infrastructure here. No one's lived or worked in this area for decades." Jake leaned over, peering at the discovery. "Maybe the miners used it for ventilation or drainage." "Maybe," Megan replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Ryan decided to move forward. "Cut around it and keep digging. We're not here to solve mysteries. This bridge needs to stay on schedule." That evening, as the crew wrapped up, Jake noticed Cole lingering near the mine shaft again. Jake, always curious and slightly mischievous, approached him. "You're drawn to that hole like a moth to a flame," Jake said with a grin. "What's really got you spooked?" Cole hesitated, then finally spoke in a hushed tone. "When I went in there, I heard something. Like tapping, but not random. It was rhythmic. Like a signal." Jake laughed. "Probably some old pipe creaking. This place is full of weird noises." But Cole shook his head. "No. It wasn't just noise. It felt deliberate. Like someone was down there." Jake's grin faded slightly as he noticed the genuine fear in Cole's eyes. "All right," he said, clapping Cole on the shoulder. "Let's take a look together. Two pairs of eyes are better than one." Armed with flashlights, the two men ventured into the mine as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air inside was cooler and carried a faint, metallic tang. Jake led the way, his boots crunching against the gravel floor. As they moved deeper, the rhythmic tapping began again, soft and faint, but unmistakable. Jake stopped, shining his flashlight into the darkness ahead. "See? Just some loose rock shifting around," he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. But Cole pointed to the walls. The strange symbols he'd noticed earlier were everywhere now, carved deep into the rock. They seemed to spiral inward, leading further into the mine. "What the hell is this?" Jake muttered, running his fingers over the markings. "No miner I know wastes time carving stuff like this." Suddenly, the tapping grew louder, more insistent. Jake and Cole exchanged nervous glances. Then came a sound that froze them in place, a long, guttural exhale, as if something deep in the mine had just taken a breath. "We need to go," Cole whispered, backing toward the entrance. Jake hesitated, his pride refusing to let him admit he was afraid. But as the exhale turned into a low growl, he turned and ran, following Cole out of the shaft and into the open air. Back at camp, the two men said nothing to the others. Ryan noticed their pale faces and tense postures but chose not to pry. He assumed the mine had simply unnerved them and decided it was best to let it go. That night, however, the strange noises escalated. The rhythmic tapping echoed across the canyon, louder now, as though something deep within the earth was trying to break free. The following morning, the camp was buzzing with quiet unease. The rhythmic tapping had grown louder overnight, keeping several workers awake. Ryan, however, dismissed their concerns as paranoia. Canyons amplify sound, he said during the morning briefing. It's just the wind, maybe some loose rocks falling. Let's focus on the job. Reluctantly, the team resumed their work. The site was bustling, machines drilling into the rocky terrain, workers shouting instructions, and the ever-present rumble of generators. But the air felt heavier that day, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. Around noon, Megan's team began setting explosives to clear a path for the main support beams. She meticulously double-checked the wiring and placement, ensuring everything was secure. Once satisfied, she gave the signal to retreat to a safe distance. The explosion was loud and powerful, sending a massive plume of dust and rock into the air. As the debris settled, the crew approached the blast site to assess the results. But instead of smooth, cleared rock, they found something unexpected. Embedded in the canyon wall was an opening, a previously hidden tunnel, larger and more deliberate than the mine shaft they'd discovered earlier. The edges were reinforced with corroded steel beams, suggesting it had been constructed long ago. Another one? Megan muttered, staring at the dark opening. Ryan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. We don't have time for this. Seal it off and move on. Jake stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. You don't want to at least take a look? Could be something useful down there. Ryan glared at him. This is a bridge project, not an archaeology dig. No one goes in there. The crew reluctantly began gathering materials to block the entrance, but before they could start, a loud crack echoed from the edge of the canyon. Look out, someone shouted. A massive chunk of the rock face gave way, sending boulders tumbling toward the workers below. Chaos erupted as people scattered. Jake barely managed to dive out of the way as a boulder crushed the generator he'd been working near. When the dust settled, the crew regrouped. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured, but the generator and several pieces of equipment were destroyed. Ryan's frustration boiled over. We can't afford these delays. Everyone needs to stay focused. This place is dangerous enough without people wandering off or getting distracted by nonsense. That evening, as the crew repaired the damage and prepared for another long night, Cole approached Megan quietly. Did you notice anything strange about that tunnel? He asked. Megan hesitated, then nodded. It's not on any of the geological surveys, and those steel reinforcements, they looked newer than they should. Like someone was maintaining it long after the mine was abandoned. Cole's face darkened. I think it's connected to the noises we've been hearing. And that accident today, it didn't feel random. Megan stared at him, unsure whether to dismiss his concerns or take them seriously. Before she could respond, another sound pierced the night, a deep, grinding noise, like metal being dragged against stone. The crew gathered near the campfire, their faces pale. The sound seemed to come from deep within the canyon, echoing up the walls and carrying with it an almost mechanical rhythm. Jake broke the silence. If this keeps up, we're not going to make it through this job. Ryan, trying to maintain control, barked, everyone, get some rest. We start again at dawn. But as the workers retreated to their trailers, the grinding noise continued, growing louder, as if the canyon itself was groaning in protest. Morning came with a heavy fog settling over the canyon, unusual for the typically dry Colorado climate. The thick mist seemed to muffle all sound, adding an eerie quiet to the already tense worksite. Ryan, determined to push forward, gathered the crew for their daily briefing. "We've had setbacks," he began, his voice firm, "but we're not stopping. Today, we focus on the foundation. No distractions, no wandering off. Let's get it done." The workers nodded, though their spirits were noticeably dampened. The strange sounds from the night before lingered in their minds, and the fog didn't help their unease. As the crew worked, Megan and Jake found themselves near the newly uncovered tunnel. It loomed like an open wound in the canyon wall, its darkness impenetrable even in daylight. "You think Ryan's right?" Jake asked, lighting a cigarette. "That it's all just wind and rock?" Megan shook her head. "I don't know. But that tunnel, it feels wrong. Like it shouldn't be there." Jake exhaled a cloud of smoke. "Only one way to find out." Before Megan could protest, Jake grabbed a flashlight from his belt and stepped into the tunnel. Cursing under her breath, she followed him. The air inside was thick and stale, carrying a faint metallic tang. The tunnel walls were reinforced with steel beams, some still intact, others warped and rusted. As they moved deeper, the ground beneath them transitioned from dirt to something harder, smooth, like polished stone. "Look at this," Megan whispered, shining her flashlight on the floor. Carved into the stone were more of the strange symbols Cole had described. They seemed to flow in patterns, forming spirals and interlocking shapes that defied easy interpretation. "Who the hell built this?" Jake muttered, running his hand over one of the carvings. "This isn't mining work." Deeper still, they found remnants of equipment, rusted tools, shattered glass, and what looked like the remains of a makeshift workstation. A broken lantern lay at the base of a steel column, its glass cracked but still reflecting the light from their flashlights. The rhythmic tapping started again. Faint at first, then louder, as though something deep in the tunnel was approaching. Megan grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to go. Now." Jake hesitated, staring into the darkness. "It's probably just." A sudden, sharp clang echoed through the tunnel, followed by a deep, guttural growl. The sound reverberated through their chests, primal and terrifying. Without another word, they turned and sprinted back toward the entrance. When they emerged into the daylight, they found Cole waiting for them, his face pale. "You went in there, didn't you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Jake nodded, catching his breath. "Something's in there, Cole. Something big." Cole glanced nervously at the other workers, who were too busy to notice the conversation. "We need to tell Ryan. We need to shut this down before someone gets hurt." Megan shook her head. "Ryan won't listen. He's too focused on the schedule. But you're right, something's not right about this place." That night, the noises returned, louder and more frequent. The tapping had transformed into a relentless pounding, accompanied by the grinding sound of metal on stone. The workers huddled in their trailers, unable to sleep. Around midnight, a scream pierced the air. Ryan bolted from his trailer, flashlight in hand, and found one of the workers, a young man named Travis, standing near the edge of the canyon, shaking uncontrollably. "What happened?" Ryan demanded. Travis pointed toward the dark expanse of the canyon. There was something moving down there. It was huge. It was watching me." Ryan scanned the area with his flashlight but saw nothing. Still, the fear in Travis's eyes was undeniable. "Everyone stay inside," Ryan ordered, his voice firm but strained. "We'll sort this out in the morning." As the crew retreated, Ryan stood alone at the edge of the canyon. The pounding noises had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. He stared into the darkness, his flashlight barely illuminating the rocky expanse below. And then, for just a moment, he thought he saw something, a faint, glowing light deep within the canyon, flickering like a distant flame. The morning arrived with an oppressive stillness, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. Ryan gathered the crew, his frustration barely concealed. The project was falling behind, and now fear was spreading among the workers like wildfire. "All right, listen up," Ryan began, his voice firm. "Last night was unsettling. But we're here to do a job, and this bridge isn't going to build itself. Stay focused, stay safe, and if you see anything strange, report it to me immediately. No wandering off. Understood?" The workers nodded reluctantly. Ryan could see the doubt in their eyes but chose to ignore it. He couldn't afford to lose control of his team now. Megan's team was tasked with reinforcing the foundation near the canyon edge. The workers moved cautiously, double-checking every beam and bolt. The strange sounds from the night before seemed to have ceased, but the tension in the air was palpable. As Megan supervised the placement of steel supports, she noticed something odd. The ground beneath the equipment looked uneven, almost as if it had been disturbed recently. She crouched down and ran her hand over the rocky surface, feeling a slight vibration. Before she could investigate further, a loud crack shattered the air. "Move back!" Megan shouted, scrambling to her feet. The ground beneath one of the drilling rigs gave way, sending the massive machine tumbling into the canyon. The operator barely managed to jump clear, landing hard on the rocky ground but avoiding serious injury. The crew rushed to his aid, their faces pale with shock. Megan ran to the edge, peering into the chasm. The rig had vanished into the darkness below, its fall marked only by the faint sound of metal crashing against the canyon walls. "This isn't normal," Megan muttered to herself. "The ground shouldn't just give way like that." Ryan arrived moments later, his face red with anger. "What the hell happened?" "The ground collapsed," Megan said, gesturing to the newly formed hole. "It's not stable, Ryan. We need to halt work until we can assess the risk." Ryan shook his head. "We don't have time for that. We'll reinforce the area and keep going." Megan stared at him in disbelief. "Ryan, this isn't just a crack in the rock. Something is wrong here. The vibrations, the collapses, it's like the ground is hollow." Jake, who had been listening nearby, chimed in. "She's right. I don't think this place wants us here." Ryan glared at him. "That's enough. I don't need ghost stories right now. Get back to work." As the day wore on, the crew worked cautiously, but the atmosphere was tense. The collapse had shaken their confidence, and even Ryan couldn't deny that something about the site felt off. During lunch, Cole approached Megan and Jake. "I saw something last night," he said in a low voice. "Down in the canyon. A light. It wasn't natural." Jake nodded grimly. "You're not the only one. Travis swears he saw something moving down there." Megan leaned closer. "We need to figure out what's going on. If we keep ignoring this, someone's going to get killed." Cole hesitated, then said, "That tunnel. I think the answers are in there." That evening, while most of the crew rested in their trailers, Megan, Jake, and Cole made their way back to the uncovered tunnel. Armed with flashlights and a rope, they prepared to venture deeper. "This is a bad idea," Jake muttered as they stepped inside. "We need to know what we're dealing with," Megan replied, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, the rhythmic tapping from before now replaced by an ominous silence. The symbols on the walls became more intricate, their patterns almost hypnotic. As they rounded a corner, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber. The walls were lined with metal beams and strange, rusted machinery, unlike anything they had seen before. In the center of the room stood a large, circular platform, partially buried under rubble. "What is this place?" Cole whispered, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, a deep, grinding noise echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of something massive shifting in the darkness. "Run," Megan said, her voice barely audible. "Run now." The three of them turned and sprinted back toward the tunnel entrance, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Behind them, the grinding noise grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. As they burst out of the tunnel and into the night, they collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. "We need to shut this site down," Megan said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. But deep down, they all knew it was too late. Whatever was buried beneath the canyon had awakened. The next morning, the team's nerves were stretched thin. Word of the previous day's collapse and the strange occurrences spread quickly. Travis, who had seen the mysterious figure in the canyon, quit on the spot and packed his things. Others whispered about leaving, but Ryan remained resolute, desperate to hold the project together. "We're staying on schedule," Ryan announced during the morning meeting, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I don't care about rumors or strange noises. This bridge will get built." Despite his bravado, Megan, Jake, and Cole exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what they'd seen in the tunnel wasn't a figment of their imagination. Megan spent the morning studying the geological surveys. Something about the entire project didn't sit right with her. The ground was far less stable than the initial reports had indicated, and the strange carvings in the tunnel walls hinted at a history far older than the abandoned mines. She called Jake and Cole over to her workstation, spreading out a large map of the canyon. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of markings on the map. "These are all known mining sites in the area, but none of them match the location of that tunnel. It's like it wasn't even documented." Jake frowned. "You're saying someone built that tunnel, reinforced it, and then erased it from the records?" "Or they didn't want anyone to find it," Cole added quietly. Megan nodded. "And those symbols we saw, they're not mining related. They're too intricate, too deliberate. This might be something older than we think." Before they could discuss further, the ground beneath them trembled, sending tools and papers clattering to the floor. The tremor lasted only a few seconds but was enough to send the entire camp into a frenzy. Ryan stormed into the room, his face flushed. "What the hell was that?" "It's not just a tremor," Megan said, trying to keep calm. "This area isn't geologically active, at least not according to the surveys. Something is destabilizing the ground." Ryan waved her off. "We've dealt with tremors before. Reinforce the site and keep working." Megan slammed her hand on the table. "Ryan, this isn't just a geological issue. There's something beneath this canyon that we don't understand, and if we keep pushing, we're putting everyone at risk." Ryan glared at her, his jaw tight. "You're an engineer, not a scientist. Do your job and leave the rest to me." That night, Megan, Jake, and Cole decided to confront the truth head-on. They returned to the tunnel with more equipment, rope, lanterns, and a handheld sonar device Megan had borrowed from the site survey team. As they descended, the oppressive atmosphere grew heavier. The strange symbols on the walls now seemed to pulse in the dim light of their flashlights, their patterns almost alive. "This is a bad idea," Jake muttered, gripping a crowbar tightly. "We need answers," Megan replied, though her voice wavered. They reached the large chamber again, the circular platform still partially buried in rubble. Megan set up the sonar device, aiming it at the platform. The machine emitted a series of sharp pings, mapping the area below the surface. "What the?" Megan trailed off, staring at the screen. The sonar revealed an enormous void beneath the platform, far larger than the chamber itself. The structure extended deep into the earth, with shapes and patterns that didn't look natural. "What is this place?" Cole asked, his voice barely audible. Before anyone could answer, a loud metallic clang echoed through the chamber, followed by a deep rumble. The ground began to shake violently, and the platform shifted slightly, as if something beneath it was stirring. "Time to go!" Jake shouted, grabbing Megan's arm. The three of them sprinted back toward the tunnel entrance, the rumbling growing louder with each step. As they neared the exit, a deafening crash echoed behind them, followed by a low, guttural roar that sent chills down their spines. They burst out into the open air, collapsing onto the rocky ground. The tunnel behind them groaned as if it were alive, its opening spewing dust and debris. Megan looked back, her face pale. This isn't natural. This isn't just rock or old machinery. Something's alive down there. Cole nodded, his hands trembling. We need to shut this site down. Now. Jake added grimly, if we don't, it won't just be the site that collapses, it'll be us. The three of them knew they had to act quickly, but convincing Ryan and the rest of the crew would be an uphill battle. And as the night fell, the canyon seemed to hum with a dark energy, as if whatever lay beneath the surface was growing stronger. The following morning, the tension at the camp was palpable. The workers were uneasy after the previous night's tremors, and whispers of something unnatural spread like wildfire. Ryan, trying to regain control, called for an emergency meeting. We've had a rough couple of days, Ryan began, addressing the gathered crew. But this is just a construction site, nothing more. No ghosts, no monsters, no curses. If you let fear control you, we might as well pack up and quit. Is that what you want? Megan, Jake, and Cole exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen too much to believe Ryan's bravado, but they knew speaking up now would only worsen the situation. One of the workers, a burly man named Harris, raised his hand. What about the collapses? The tremors? The sounds at night? You're telling us that's all just coincidence? Ryan nodded, his voice steady. This canyon has unstable ground, and the wind plays tricks on your ears. That's it. Now, if you're scared, feel free to leave. But if you stay, we work. Understood? The room was silent. No one wanted to be the first to walk away, but fear lingered in every face. Later that day, Megan tried once again to reason with Ryan. You're putting everyone at risk, she said, showing him the sonar data from the night before. Look at this. There's a massive void beneath the canyon, and it's not natural. Something down there is shifting, and it's destabilizing the ground. Ryan glanced at the data, his jaw tightening. I don't have time for theories, Megan. We're here to build a bridge, not dig up mysteries. If you keep ignoring this, someone's going to die, she snapped. Ryan slammed the table, his frustration boiling over. Enough. If you can't follow orders, I'll replace you. Do your job, or pack your things. Megan stormed out, her heart pounding. She found Jake and Cole near the equipment yard, where they were pretending to work but were clearly just as shaken as she was. He's not going to listen, she said, pacing. He's too focused on the schedule to see what's right in front of him. Jake sighed, leaning on his crowbar. Then we need to do something ourselves. We can't just sit around waiting for the next collapse. Cole hesitated. What if we sabotage the site? Just enough to force them to shut it down and investigate. Megan stared at him, shocked. That's insane. We can't risk innocent people getting hurt. People are already at risk, Cole argued. If we don't stop this now, it's only going to get worse. Jake nodded reluctantly. He's got a point. We can't trust Ryan to do the right thing. After a tense silence, Megan finally relented. All right. But we need to be smart about this. No one can know it was us. That night, while the camp slept, the three of them snuck into the equipment yard. They sabotaged one of the smaller drilling rigs, loosening bolts and cutting wires to make it appear as though it had malfunctioned. Their goal was simple: delay the project long enough to force an inspection. As they worked, the familiar tapping noise returned, louder and more insistent than ever. It echoed across the canyon, accompanied by a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Cole froze, gripping his flashlight. "Do you hear that?" Jake nodded, his face pale. "It's coming from the tunnel." Before they could react, a loud crash shattered the night. The ground beneath the equipment yard cracked open, swallowing one of the larger machines. Sparks flew as metal twisted and collapsed into the void. The noise woke the entire camp. Workers poured out of their trailers, shouting in confusion as Ryan sprinted to the scene. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, glaring at Megan, Jake, and Cole, who stood frozen near the destruction. "It's the ground," Megan said, her voice shaking. "It's collapsing faster than we thought. Ryan, we need to evacuate. Now." Ryan clenched his fists, his face a mask of fury. "We're not leaving. We'll reinforce the site and keep going." But before anyone could respond, the deep growl they had heard in the tunnel echoed across the canyon, louder and more menacing than ever. The workers fell silent, their fear now undeniable. In the distance, near the edge of the canyon, a faint, flickering light appeared, brighter this time, moving slowly but deliberately. "What is that?" Harris whispered, his voice trembling. No one answered. The camp stood in stunned silence as the flickering light grew brighter, moving with an unnatural, deliberate rhythm. It cast an eerie glow across the canyon walls, illuminating the jagged rock in strange, shifting patterns. "What the hell is that?" Jake muttered, gripping his crowbar like a weapon. Ryan tried to take control. "Everyone back to your trailers. It's just some kind of reflection from the equipment." But his voice wavered, betraying his own uncertainty. "No equipment can make that kind of light," Megan said, her eyes fixed on the glowing orb. The growl returned, louder and closer than before. The ground beneath them trembled, sending loose rocks tumbling into the canyon. Workers began to panic, some retreating to the safety of their trailers while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Megan, Jake, and Cole exchanged glances. They knew they couldn't stay silent any longer. "We need to tell them," Megan said, her voice urgent. "About the tunnel, the symbols, everything." "Are you crazy?" Jake replied. "If we tell them what we've seen, they'll think we've lost it." "Do you think they're not already terrified?" Cole said. "This might be the only way to make them leave." Megan turned to the workers, her voice loud and clear. "Listen to me. That light, those noises, they're coming from the tunnel we uncovered. There's something down there, and it's causing the ground to collapse. We need to leave before it's too late." Ryan stepped forward, furious. "Enough. You're spreading paranoia. This site is perfectly safe." "It's not safe." Megan shot back, holding up her sonar data. "Look at this. There's a massive void beneath us, and whatever's in it is waking up. If we stay here, we're all going to die." The workers looked at each other, their fear mounting. Ryan's authority was crumbling, and he knew it. Before Ryan could respond, a deafening roar erupted from the canyon, shaking the ground violently. The light flared brighter, illuminating a massive shape rising from the depths. It was hard to make out in the chaos, but it seemed to be made of twisted metal and rock, its form shifting and grinding as if it were alive. Workers screamed and ran in every direction. One of the trailers tipped over, crushing a generator beneath it. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning fuel and the metallic groan of collapsing structures. "Everyone, get to the trucks!" Ryan shouted, finally abandoning his denial. "We're evacuating now." The crew scrambled to gather their belongings, but the chaos made it nearly impossible. The ground cracked and heaved, sending more machinery tumbling into the abyss. Megan, Jake, and Cole stayed together, running toward the vehicles parked near the edge of the camp. "What the hell is that thing?" Jake shouted, glancing back at the enormous shape rising from the canyon. "I don't know," Megan replied, her voice trembling. "But it's not natural." Cole stopped suddenly, staring at the light. "Wait," he said. "It's moving toward the tunnel. Like it's drawn to it." Megan grabbed his arm. "We don't have time to figure this out. We need to go." As they reached the trucks, they saw Ryan standing in the middle of the chaos, shouting orders at the fleeing workers. His voice was drowned out by the roar of the creature and the sound of collapsing ground. "Ryan!" Megan shouted. "Come on!" But he didn't move. He was staring at the creature, his face a mixture of awe and terror. "It's alive," he whispered, as if finally understanding the magnitude of the danger. The ground beneath Ryan cracked, and with a final, earth-shaking roar, it gave way, sending him plummeting into the canyon. "Ryan!" Megan screamed, but there was nothing they could do. As the remaining workers piled into the trucks, the vehicles roared to life, speeding away from the collapsing site. Megan, Jake, and Cole sat in the back of one truck, watching as the glowing light and massive shape disappeared into the canyon's depths, leaving destruction in its wake. The roar faded, and an eerie silence fell over the group. "What now?" Jake asked, his voice hollow. Megan looked back at the canyon, her mind racing. "We have to report this. Whatever's down there, it's not done. And if we don't stop it, it's going to come back." Cole nodded grimly. "And next time, it won't just be the canyon." The truck sped down the rough desert road, the canyon shrinking behind them. The rumbling of the collapsing ground was gone, but the memory of it lingered in the air. The workers, crammed into the backs of vehicles, sat in stunned silence. No one spoke, each person lost in their thoughts. Megan stared out the window, her hands trembling. She couldn't erase the image of Ryan falling into the abyss, or the massive, shifting shape that had emerged from the canyon. She clenched her jaw, trying to steady her breathing. Jake broke the silence. "So, what the hell do we do now? Just pretend this didn't happen?" Cole shook his head. "We can't. Something like that, someone's going to come looking. The government, geologists, hell, maybe even the military. And what do we tell them?" Jake asked bitterly. "That we saw a giant thing crawling out of a canyon. They'll think we've lost it." Megan looked at them both, her voice steady despite her fear. "We tell them the truth. Whatever's down there, it's dangerous. We need to report everything, about the tunnel, the symbols, the collapses. All of it." Jake sighed, rubbing his face. "And then what? Even if they believe us, who's going to stop something like that?" The trucks pulled into a small town on the edge of the desert, where the crew regrouped at a dusty diner. The workers sat in small groups, some muttering nervously, others simply staring at their untouched food. The weight of what they'd seen hung over them like a storm cloud. Megan, Jake, and Cole sat in a booth near the back, going over their next steps. "We start with the local authorities," Megan said. "They'll escalate it to state agencies, and from there," she trailed off, unsure of how far this would go. Cole leaned forward, his voice low. "What if they try to cover it up? You saw how Ryan handled this. They might just shut it all down and pretend nothing happened." Megan frowned, considering his words. "Then we document everything. Photos, sonar data, maps, anything we can use to prove what we saw. We can't let this be buried." As the sun set over the desert, the remaining workers began dispersing, some vowing never to speak of the incident, others promising to report it to the authorities. Megan, Jake, and Cole stayed behind, determined to ensure the truth came to light. Before they left the diner, Megan pulled out her laptop and began organizing the data they'd collected. The sonar scans of the void beneath the canyon were the most compelling evidence, showing the massive, unnatural structure buried deep underground. What do you think it is? Jake asked, watching the screen. Megan shook her head. I don't know. It's not natural, that's for sure. And those symbols, they look ancient, but they're carved into steel and reinforced rock. Whoever, or whatever, made that tunnel wasn't just mining. Cole glanced out the window, his expression grim. And now it's awake. Later that night, as the trio settled into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, Megan couldn't sleep. The faint hum of the air conditioner did little to drown out the memories of the past few days. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her laptop screen. Something about the sonar scans didn't sit right with her. The void beneath the canyon wasn't just a hollow space, it was structured. The patterns and shapes in the data suggested corridors, chambers, and something massive at the very center. She zoomed in on the center of the scan, her heart pounding. The object was too symmetrical to be natural, and its outline was faintly familiar, almost like a machine. What are you? She whispered to herself. In the next room, Jake and Cole were also wide awake, their minds racing. You think it's still down there? Jake asked, staring at the ceiling. Cole nodded. It's not going anywhere. It's been buried for God knows how long, and now we've disturbed it. Whatever it is, it's not done. Jake sighed, turning on his side. I just hope we haven't woken something we can't stop. Outside, the desert was quiet, the stars scattered across the dark sky. But far in the distance, near the edge of the canyon, a faint glow flickered briefly before disappearing into the shadows. The next morning, Megan woke up with a sense of urgency gnawing at her. She spent the night poring over the data, unable to shake the feeling that the void beneath the canyon wasn't just a random structure, it had a purpose. Whatever had been unearthed, it wasn't meant to be found. She met Jake and Cole in the motel lobby, both of them looking as sleep-deprived as she felt. I've been going through the sonar data, Megan said, setting her laptop on the table in front of them. This isn't just an empty space. Look at this. She pointed to a section of the scan that outlined the void. The image showed a series of concentric rings surrounding a central chamber. Those rings aren't natural, she continued. They're evenly spaced and perfectly circular. It's like a mechanism. Jake frowned, leaning closer. You're saying it's a machine? I think so, Megan replied. And those symbols we saw carved into the walls, they're not just random markings. They're part of it. Maybe instructions, or some kind of language. Cole ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. If it's a machine, then what does it do? And why is it buried under a canyon? Megan shook her head. I don't know. But I think the drilling and blasting woke it up. And whatever we saw last night, that's just the beginning. The trio decided to report their findings to the authorities, starting with the local sheriff's department. They walked into the small, cluttered office, where a middle-aged sheriff named Carter greeted them with a skeptical look. You're telling me there's some kind of machine under the canyon? He asked, leaning back in his chair. Yes, Megan said firmly, showing him the sonar scans. And it's destabilizing the ground. The site's already collapsing, and if it keeps spreading, it could be catastrophic. Sheriff Carter studied the images, his brow furrowed. This is above my pay grade, he muttered. I'll make some calls, but I'm telling you now, people aren't going to believe this. They'll say it's just bad geology. Let them think what they want, Jake said. But if they ignore this, a lot of people could die. Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. All right. I'll escalate it. But don't hold your breath for a quick response. That evening, Megan received an email from a geologist she had contacted earlier, a former professor who specialized in tectonic structures. Attached to the message was an analysis of the sonar data. Her heart sank as she read his conclusions. The void beneath the canyon isn't just unstable, it's expanding. The concentric rings suggest a controlled, mechanical process. Whatever is down there is generating seismic activity, and it's growing stronger. The email ended with a stark warning. You need to evacuate the area immediately. This is no natural phenomenon. If this continues, the structural integrity of the entire region could be compromised. Megan shared the email with Jake and Cole, who both looked grim. So, it's alive and it's growing, Jake said. Great. Cole leaned forward, his voice hushed. What if it's not just a machine? What if it's something older? Something we can't understand? Megan frowned. You mean like alien? Or ancient civilization? Cole shrugged. Does it matter? Whatever it is, we've triggered it, and now it's waking up. Jake looked between them, his frustration mounting. So, what's the plan? We already tried telling the authorities, and they're dragging their feet. We can't just sit here waiting for this thing to destroy the canyon. Megan took a deep breath. We go back. Jake stared at her. You can't be serious. I am, she said firmly. We need to figure out what it is and how to stop it. If we don't, no one else will. Cole hesitated, then nodded. She's right. We're the only ones who've seen it up close. If there's a way to shut it down, it's in that tunnel. Jake groaned, rubbing his face. You two are gonna get us killed. Maybe, Megan said. But if we do nothing, it'll kill a lot more people than just us. As night fell, the three of them packed their gear and prepared for one final trip into the canyon. The glowing light had returned, faint but visible on the horizon, pulsing like a heartbeat. Whatever happens, Megan said, her voice steady, we stick together. Jake and Cole nodded, and the three of them set off toward the edge of the canyon, the weight of their decision pressing heavily on their shoulders. Far below, the grinding sound of shifting metal echoed once again, louder this time, as if the machine beneath the canyon was calling them back. The trek back to the canyon was eerily quiet. The desert air, usually alive with the sounds of insects and rustling wind, felt unnaturally still. Only the faint, rhythmic pulsing of the glowing light guided Megan, Jake, and Cole as they approached the edge. The camp was abandoned, its trailers and machinery scattered and half buried in debris from the earlier collapses. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, vibrating ever so slightly, as if the earth itself was alive. Last chance to turn back, Jake muttered, his voice laced with both fear and grim determination. No turning back now, Megan replied, gripping the straps of her pack. Cole nodded silently, already shining his flashlight toward the open tunnel entrance. The descent into the tunnel felt longer this time. The air grew colder and heavier as they ventured deeper, their footsteps echoing against the damp stone walls. The strange symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly now, their intricate patterns almost pulsating in sync with the light emanating from the depths. This place feels alive, Cole whispered, breaking the silence. It's not just a place, Megan said, her voice tight. It's a system. A machine. And it's waking up. The tunnel opened once again into the massive central chamber, where the circular platform stood fully exposed now, no longer buried under rubble. The ground around it had shifted, revealing more of the intricate structure, massive gears, pipes, and conduits that disappeared into the walls and ceiling. The platform itself glowed faintly, its surface covered in the same symbols that adorned the tunnel walls. Okay, Jake said, swallowing hard. Now what? Megan approached the platform cautiously, her flashlight sweeping over the symbols. There has to be a way to shut it down. Machines have functions, start, stop, reset. We just need to figure out how this one works. Assuming it can be shut down, Cole muttered, keeping his distance. As Megan examined the platform, she noticed something strange, the symbols weren't random. They formed patterns, circular sequences that seemed to align with the rings on the sonar scans. In the center of the platform, a small, recessed panel caught her eye. "I think this is it," she said, motioning for the others to join her. Jake hesitated. "And what happens if we mess with it? What if it makes things worse?" "We don't have a choice," Megan replied. "This thing is destabilizing the entire area. If we don't stop it now, it'll collapse the whole canyon, and maybe more." Taking a deep breath, she pressed her hand against the panel. The symbols on the platform flared to life, glowing brighter as the ground beneath them began to tremble. The machine roared to life, its gears grinding and turning as the platform shifted. A low, guttural hum filled the chamber, rising in intensity. The glowing light in the center grew blinding, forcing them to shield their eyes. "What did you do?" Jake shouted over the noise. "I don't know." Megan yelled back, frantically studying the symbols. "It's reacting to something, maybe the seismic activity, maybe us." The chamber shook violently as cracks spread across the walls and ceiling. Dust and debris rained down, and the air filled with the deafening sound of grinding metal. "We need to go," Cole shouted, tugging at Megan's arm. "No, wait," she cried, pointing to the platform. "It's shutting down." Sure enough, the light began to fade, the grinding noise slowing as the massive gears ground to a halt. The tremors lessened, and for a moment, the chamber was still. But the silence was short-lived. From deep within the void, a new sound emerged, a deep, resonant rumble, like the groan of something enormous stirring. Megan's heart sank. "It's not just a machine," she whispered. "It's alive." The platform suddenly erupted with light, brighter and more chaotic than before. The symbols on the walls flared in unison, and a massive column of energy shot upward, piercing through the ceiling and into the night sky. The trio stumbled backward, shielding their faces. Megan, Jake, and Cole dropped to their knees, shielding their faces from the blinding light shooting up from the platform. The beam tore through the ceiling, sending debris crashing down around them. From deep within the void, the guttural roar returned, closer, louder, and angrier than ever. "This thing isn't stopping," Jake shouted, his voice barely audible over the deafening noise. Megan's mind raced as she frantically scanned the glowing symbols. They pulsed and shifted in rhythmic patterns, as if they were responding to the energy surge. She realized something terrifying: this wasn't just a machine, it was a containment system. This machine was never meant to be used, she yelled. It was holding something in. And now we've released it. The ground shook violently as the walls of the chamber began to crack and crumble. The circular platform shifted, grinding against the floor as massive pieces of the ceiling fell into the abyss below. Cole grabbed Megan's arm. "We have to get out of here. This whole place is coming down." "No," Megan cried, pulling free. "There has to be a way to reactivate the containment. If we don't stop it now, it'll destroy everything." Jake hesitated, torn between self-preservation and helping her. "Megan, if you don't leave, you're gonna die down here." Megan ignored him, her eyes locked on the central panel of the platform. She saw a new sequence of symbols glowing brighter than the rest. It looked like a reset command, but it wasn't clear what would happen if she activated it. "It's the only way," she muttered to herself. Megan slammed her hand against the glowing symbols. The chamber erupted in a deafening roar as the platform surged with energy. The beam of light flickered and pulsed erratically, the symbols on the walls flashing in chaotic patterns. From the depths of the void, the enormous shape they had glimpsed before began to rise again. It was massive, a grotesque fusion of rock, metal, and something alive. Its glowing, shifting form seemed to defy logic, and the sight of it filled them with a primal, instinctive fear. Megan turned to Jake and Cole. "Get out. Now." "What about you?" Jake yelled. I'll finish this. Megan shouted. Just go. Jake and Cole hesitated for only a moment before turning and running back toward the tunnel. The ground beneath them cracked and buckled, and the roar of the creature grew louder, echoing through the collapsing chamber. Megan stayed behind, frantically pressing the sequence of symbols on the panel. The light from the platform began to shift, dimming and then intensifying in pulses. The energy beam flickered, then suddenly reversed, pulling light and debris back into the void as if the machine were trying to contain the creature once more. The creature roared in defiance, its massive form struggling against the pull of the containment field. Megan's heart raced as she kept her hand on the panel, the platform shaking violently beneath her feet. "Come on," she whispered. "Hold it, just a little longer." Jake and Cole reached the surface just as the tunnel behind them collapsed, sending up a massive plume of dust and debris. They turned back, their faces pale with shock and despair. "Megan," Cole muttered, his voice breaking. Jake shook his head, gripping his crowbar tightly. She knew what she was doing. The ground trembled beneath them one last time, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rumbling stopped. The light from the canyon disappeared, plunging the desert into silence. The next day, a team of geologists and federal investigators arrived at the site, called in by Sheriff Carter after the workers had reported the events. The canyon was unrecognizable, a gaping chasm where the camp had once been, with no sign of the platform, the machine, or the creature. Jake and Cole stood at the edge, watching as the investigators set up equipment to study the site. "Do you think it's over?" Cole asked. Jake stared into the void, his expression grim. "I don't know. But whatever she did, it bought us time." Later that night, as they sat in a motel room miles from the canyon, Cole turned on the television. The news was covering an unusual seismic event in the region, describing it as an unexplained collapse with no clear cause. Jake poured himself a drink, his hands still shaking. "They'll never know what really happened." Cole nodded, staring at the screen. "But we will. And so will she." Far beneath the surface of the canyon, deep within the rubble, faint symbols still glowed, pulsing softly in the darkness. The containment system held, for now. But the void was far from silent.